During dinner, my parents scoffed. How does it feel to be the least productive person here? Everyone snickered. I shot back. How does it feel knowing the least productive one won't be footing your bills anymore? As soon as I finished speaking, imagine spending your entire life desperately trying to earn the love of your own parents, only to have them look you in the eye and call you useless. That night, something inside me didn't just break. It shattered into a million pieces, and in the ruins I found the courage to reclaim my entire life. My name is Natalie and I'm 28. For years I'd been a successful software engineer, and for even longer, I'd been the family ATM, financially supporting my parents despite their relentless soul-crushing criticism. But that evening, sitting in an upscale restaurant when my father sneered, "How does it feel being the most useless one here?" And everyone laughed, something shifted. The words left my mouth before I could even stop them. How does it feel knowing this useless one will not be paying your bills anymore? If you've ever felt trapped, wondering if you could ever truly stand up for yourself, then let me tell you how my life changed forever that night. My childhood, it felt like walking on a minefield every single day. My parents, Robert and Diane, possessed this uncanny talent for making me feel small, worthless, no matter what I did, what I achieved. I'd bring home straight A's, beaming with pride, and my dad, Robert, would barely glance at the report card. His first question, "Why aren't you doing more extracurriculars like normal kids?" I won the regional science fair in 8th grade, a huge deal for a nerdy kid like me. And my mom, Diane, just sighed. "It's such a shame you don't put that much effort into your appearance, Natalie," she'd say. This wasn't just a phase, this was my childhood. My achievements were consistently diminished, my faults magnified, put on full display for anyone who'd listen. Family gatherings weren't about connection, they were a stage. A stage for the disappointment show, starring yours truly, their daughter Natalie. Despite their complete lack of emotional support, I was driven. I excelled academically, desperate to prove my worth, though I never seemed to reach that impossibly high bar they'd set. When I received a full scholarship to a prestigious university for computer science, my father remarked, "You're lucky. Anyone can get into college these days." My mother, God bless her, wondered aloud why I hadn't chosen a more suitable career for a woman. College became my sanctuary, my escape. Away from their suffocating criticism, I didn't just survive, I thrived. I graduated at the top of my class, multiple job offers from top tech companies practically falling into my lap. I chose TechSphere, a growing software company in the city, and quickly established myself as a valuable team member. By 25, I'd been promoted twice and was leading my own development team. Financial success came quickly, but with it, an unexpected, crushing burden. 6 months into my career, my father lost his job. My mother, who had never worked outside the home, called me in tears, claiming they might lose their house. Without a second thought, I offered to help temporarily with their mortgage. "It's just for a little while," I told myself. But a little while somehow morphed into a permanent arrangement. Soon I wasn't just covering their mortgage, it was their car payments, utility bills, even their weekly groceries. Nearly 40% of my income, every single month, vanished into their lives. And the gratitude? Non-existent. Instead, they acted as if it was my absolute obligation. "After all we did raising you," my mother would sigh dramatically, "it's the least you could do." The inconvenient truth that I'd cooked my own meals since age 12, practically raised myself, and put myself through college on scholarships, seemed to be erased from their memories. The financial contributions didn't soften them. If anything, their emotional abuse intensified. Our weekly phone calls became torture. My mother would inquire about my love life, expressing concern that I'd end up alone with all those computers. My father would grill me about my savings, implying I should be making more money by now. Each conversation left me feeling hollow, drained, and utterly worthless. My therapist, Dr. Winters, had been gently, persistently suggesting for months that I needed to establish boundaries. "Your relationship with them is fundamentally unbalanced, Natalie," she'd say. "You are giving everything and receiving emotional harm in return." I knew she was right deep down, but the thought of confronting them terrified me. I had been conditioned since childhood to crave their approval, and the idea of disappointing them further felt unbearable. Months bled into years, and my resentment grew right alongside my career success. I bought my own condominium, a modern one-bedroom in a great neighborhood, while still paying the mortgage on their 3-bedroom suburban home. I drove a modest used car, while financing my father's new SUV. I budgeted my personal expenses meticulously, while my mother shopped freely with the allowance I provided. The emotional toll became unbearable. I developed anxiety, experiencing full-blown panic attacks before family gatherings. I started making excuses to miss Sunday dinners, only to be bombarded with guilt-tripping texts and phone calls. "I guess your family isn't important enough for you anymore," my mother would wail. "Now that you have your fancy job, you're too good for us," my father would add, the sting of his words a constant reminder of my supposed failings. In the weeks leading up to that fateful dinner, the tension had been ratcheting up. My younger sister, Amanda, announced her engagement, and my parents, of course, immediately volunteered to host an extravagant party, knowing full well who'd be footing the bill. When I cautiously suggested a more modest celebration, my mother accused me of being jealous. My father called me selfish and reminded me, yet again, how much I owed them for all their sacrifices. The breaking point was hurtling towards me faster than I realized. Years of suppressed feelings were bubbling to the surface, and it would take just one more push to make everything overflow. The monthly family dinner was a tradition I had reluctantly established and funded for the past 3 years. Every first Friday, I'd reserve a table at a nice restaurant, and my entire family would gather to enjoy an evening of fine dining at my expense. These dinners typically cost me several $100s, but I justified it as the price of maintaining some semblance of family harmony. On this particular Friday in April, I had reserved a table at L'Amour, an upscale French restaurant downtown. The occasion was supposedly a celebration of my recent promotion to senior development manager, though I suspected my family was far more interested in the expensive menu than my career achievement. The guest list included my parents Robert and Diane, my younger sister Amanda, her fiancé Jackson, my brother Michael, his wife Sarah, and my Aunt Patricia, who never missed an opportunity for a free meal. I arrived early as usual to ensure everything was perfect. The hostess led me to our reserved table, a round booth in the corner with an elegant chandelier overhead. As I sat there, alone waiting for them, I felt the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. I checked my watch repeatedly, knowing they'd be at least 15 minutes late, as they always were. The anticipation of their inevitable criticisms made my hands tremble slightly. I took deep, shaky breaths, trying to calm myself. My parents arrived first, 20 minutes late, naturally. My mother air-kissed my cheek without actually making contact, while my father merely nodded in my direction. They immediately ordered the most expensive drinks on the menu without so much as a hello. My mother then complained about the parking, subtly implying I should have chosen a restaurant with valet service. My father scrutinized the menu prices with raised eyebrows, even though he knew perfectly well I'd be covering the entire bill. "You look tired," my mother commented, her standard greeting, regardless of how I actually looked. I was wearing a new dress I'd bought just for this occasion and had spent extra time on my hair and makeup. "Are they working you too hard at that company? Your skin is breaking out." "I'm fine, Mom," I replied, resisting the urge to touch my face self-consciously. "Just busy with the new position." My father grunted. "They probably promoted you because they need more women in management. Companies do that nowadays for their image." Before I could respond, the rest of the family arrived in a noisy cluster. Amanda immediately commanded attention, flashing her engagement ring dramatically. My brother Michael looked uncomfortable, as he often did at these gatherings, while his wife Sarah smiled politely. Aunt Patricia made a beeline for the wine list. Once everyone was seated and drinks were ordered, my mother took control of the conversation as always. She launched into an elaborate description of the wedding plan she was making for Amanda. Even though the engagement was barely a month old, I noticed with a sinking feeling that the plan sounded incredibly expensive. I knew with dread that I'd be expected to contribute significantly. "We're thinking a minimum of 200 guests," my mother announced, her eyes glittering. "And the Riverfront Gardens venue would be perfect, wouldn't it, Natalie?" She looked at me pointedly. The Riverfront Gardens was one of the most expensive wedding venues in the city. I nodded non-committally, but my mother, ever the opportunist, took this as agreement. "Wonderful. I'll put down the deposit next week. They require $10,000 to hold the date." $10,000. The amount hung in the air between us, heavy and unspoken. Everyone at that table knew exactly who would be providing that money. "That seems like a lot for a deposit," I said carefully, my voice barely a whisper. "Well, quality costs money," my mother replied dismissively, her gaze sweeping over my new dress. "Not everything can be cheap like your apartment." My one-bedroom condominium had cost me $350,000 in the competitive city market, but I let the comment slide as I always did. The conversation continued in this vein throughout the appetizers. My father complained about needing a new golf club membership because his current one had gone downhill. Aunt Patricia mentioned her upcoming vacation to Europe, looking at me expectantly as if waiting for an offer to fund it. Amanda talked endlessly about wedding details, each one more extravagant than the last. By the time our main course arrived, I was feeling increasingly tense. No one had asked about my promotion, no one showed any interest in my accomplishments. Instead, the conversation revolved entirely around what everyone else needed or wanted, with the unspoken, undeniable understanding that I would provide it. "So, Natalie," my father said suddenly, his voice carrying across the table, making everyone fall silent, "I heard your company is having layoffs. Should you really be spending money on dinners like this?" The table fell silent. My company was absolutely not having layoffs. In fact, we were expanding rapidly. My promotion had come with a significant raise and an equity package. "There are no layoffs," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "The company is doing very well." "That's not what I read online," my father insisted, waving a dismissive hand. "Tech companies are struggling. You should be saving your money." The irony of this statement, coming from a man whose lifestyle I largely funded, was apparently completely lost on him. "Robert is right," my mother chimed in, leaning forward. "You need to be more careful with money. You're not getting any younger, and no man wants a woman who can't manage her finances." I felt my face growing hot, a familiar flush of shame and anger. "I manage my finances very well," I said, my voice strained, barely holding back the tide of emotion. "Really?" my father scoffed, looking around the table, daring anyone to disagree. "Then why are you still in that tiny apartment? Everyone else your age has a real house by now. Everyone else my age isn't paying for 2 households." I wanted to scream, but I bit my tongue hard. Amanda, ever quick to seize an opportunity, jumped in to talk about the house she and Jackson were planning to buy after the wedding. "We're looking in the Oak Ridge neighborhood," she chirped. "The houses there start around $600,000. Lovely area," my mother approved, beaming. "Natalie, maybe you could help them with the down payment as a wedding gift? 20% would be, what, $120,000? That would be so generous of you." The sheer audacity of this suggestion left me momentarily speechless. I was already expected to pay for their entire wedding, and now a house down payment too? The tension at the table was thick, suffocating, and I could feel something shifting inside me, a deep tremor. Years of suppressed feelings were threatening to surface violently. I took a sip of water, trying desperately to stay calm. "Actually," I began, surprising myself with the boldness of my own voice, "I've been thinking about buying a house myself. Maybe in Oak Ridge too." The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. My family exchanged glances, clearly disturbed by the radical idea that I might actually spend my money on myself for once. "Don't be ridiculous," my father finally said, his voice laced with annoyance. "You don't need a house. What would you do with all that space? It would be wasted on you. Besides," my mother added, a chilling smile on her face, "you need to focus on helping Amanda right now. Her future is just beginning." "And what about my future?" I asked, the question escaping my lips before I could censor it. My father laughed, a short, dismissive, brutal sound that cut through me like a knife. He looked around the table, inviting everyone to join in his amusement at my expense. "Your future? Come on, Natalie. Let's be realistic here." And then came the words that would change everything. Leaning forward, a sneer twisting his lips, he asked, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "How does it feel being the most useless one here?" And everyone laughed. My mother, my sister, my aunt. Even my brother Michael gave an uncomfortable chuckle. Only Sarah, my brother's wife, remained silent, looking down at her plate. In that excruciating moment, something inside me didn't just break. No, something was finally fixed. The suffocating weight of years of emotional abuse and financial exploitation suddenly became unbearable. I knew with absolute certainty that I couldn't carry it anymore. The laughter around the table seemed to stretch into an eternity as I sat there, my face burning with humiliation, yes, but also with a growing volcanic anger. In that suspended moment, memories flashed through my mind, the countless times I'd been belittled, the sacrifices I'd made, the money I'd given them, the emotional abuse I'd endured, all in a desperate, futile hope of earning a love that never came. I looked at my father's smug expression, my mother's amused smile, my sister's gleeful face, and something hard and crystalline formed within me. Clarity. Resolve. It replaced my usual anxiety like a sudden cleansing storm. Without planning to, without the careful filtering I typically apply to every word I spoke to my family, I responded. My voice, to my own surprise, was calm, steady, and dangerously quiet. "How does it feel knowing this useless one will not be paying your bills anymore?" The laughter stopped. Abruptly, 5 shocked faces stared back at me, mouths agape, as my words hung in the air like a thunderclap. My father's expression shifted, rapidly, from amusement to confusion, then to pure, unadulterated anger. What are you talking about? He demanded, his voice low but intense, a dangerous rumble. Exactly what I said, I replied, still surprised by the steadiness in my voice. I am done. No more mortgage payments. No more car loans. No more utility bills. No more credit card payments. No more funding your lifestyle while you treat me like garbage. My mother's face went white. Natalie, you can't be serious. You're just being sensitive as usual. I have never been more serious in my life, I said, looking her dead in the eyes. For years I have given you everything I could, financially and emotionally. And what have I gotten in return? Criticism, mockery, and disrespect. After everything we have done for you, my father began, his face reddening with rage. This is how you repay us? By making a scene in public. What exactly have you done for me? I asked, genuinely curious, the question sharp and unexpected. Did you pay for my education? No, I earned scholarships. Did you support my career choices? No, you belittled them. Did you even provide emotional support? No, you tore down every accomplishment. We gave you life, my mother, she declared, almost hysterically. We raised you, fed you, clothed you. The bare minimum required by law, I noted, my voice cold now. And I have been repaying that basic parental obligation 100-fold for years now. My father's strategy shifted, from anger to intimidation. His specialty. You won't cut us off, he said with cold certainty, leaning back. You wouldn't dare. Watch me, I replied, pulling out my phone. In fact, let me show you how serious I am. I opened my banking app, and with a few taps, canceled the automatic payment scheduled to go to their mortgage company the following Monday. There. That is the last mortgage payment you will ever receive from me. My mother gasped, a small pathetic sound. Natalie, that payment is due next week. How will we pay it? The same way other adults do, I shot back, the words coming easily now. With your own money from your own jobs. You know your father hasn't been able to find suitable work, my mother protested, tears welling up on cue. He hasn't been looking, I corrected her, my voice unwavering. Why would he, when he has me as his personal ATM? My sister Amanda, seeing the flow of easy money potentially drying up right before her expensive wedding, decided to intervene. Natalie, you're being cruel. Mom and Dad have always supported you. And what about my wedding? You promised. I never promised to pay for your wedding, I said calmly. That was decided for me, not by me. Just like everything else. Then, to my complete shock, my brother Michael, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. She has a point, you know. Natalie has been supporting everyone for years, and no one ever thanks her. Instead, you all just demand more. I looked at Michael, my heart swelling with a mix of surprise and profound gratitude. It was the first time he had ever defended me against our parents. My father turned his anger toward Michael. Stay out of this. This is between us and your sister. No, Michael said firmly, straightening his shoulders. This involves all of us, and the way we have been taking advantage of Natalie. My mother, seeing her control of the situation slipping, resorted to her most effective tactic, tears. Her eyes welled up on command, and she dabbed at them delicately with her napkin. I cannot believe my own daughter would do this to us. After all the sacrifices we made. What sacrifices, Mom? I asked, pushing it, needing to hear her answer. Name one significant sacrifice you've made for me in the last 10 years. She couldn't answer, instead turning to my aunt for support. Patricia, can you believe how she is speaking to us? Aunt Patricia, who had been quietly calculating how this development might affect her own financial interests, chose her words carefully. Perhaps we should all calm down and discuss this privately, not in a restaurant. There is nothing to discuss, I said, rising from the table, my purse clutched tightly in my hand. I have made my decision. I will not be financially supporting any of you anymore. My father slammed his hand on the table, causing the glasses to jump and several nearby diners to turn and stare. You listen to me, young lady. You have obligations to this family. You cannot just walk away. Actually, I can, I said, looking him squarely in the eye. I have no legal obligation to support capable adults who choose not to support themselves. My only obligation was a moral one, based on the mistaken belief that you actually loved and valued me. That illusion is now gone. If you walk out that door, my father threatened, his voice shaking with fury, don't expect to be welcomed back into this family. I looked around the table at the faces of my family, people who had taken everything and given nothing, who had mocked and belittled me, even as they cashed my checks. That's not the threat you think it is, I said quietly, a strange sense of peace settling over me. Being excluded from this toxic dynamic sounds more like a reward than a punishment. With those words, I walked away from the table, feeling both terrified and strangely, profoundly liberated. As I passed the hostess stand, I paused to pay for the meals that had already been served and apologize for the disturbance. Then I stepped out into the cool evening air, took a deep breath and felt, for the first time in years, the weight beginning to lift from my shoulders. Driving home, my emotions cycled rapidly. Elation at finally standing up for myself, fear about the inevitable repercussions, and a deep, aching sadness for the loving family I had always wanted but never truly had. My phone began buzzing incessantly with texts and calls, but I ignored them all. Tonight was for me, to begin processing what had just happened and what it meant for my future. The moment I stepped into my condominium, my phone practically exploded with notifications. 15 missed calls, 28 text messages and 3 voicemails, all from family members. I silenced my phone and placed it face down on the counter, needing space, needing air, needing to process. My hands were shaking as I poured myself a glass of water. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was finally subsiding, leaving me feeling drained, but strangely, wonderfully peaceful. For the first time in years, I had spoken my truth, unfiltered by the endless demands of my family. The texts had started arriving before I had even left the restaurant parking lot. I finally gathered the courage to read them. From Mom: "How could you embarrass us like this? Call me immediately." From Dad: "You are making a huge mistake. We need to talk now." From Amanda: "You are ruining everything. What about my wedding?" From Aunt Patricia: "Your behavior was shocking. Your poor mother is in tears." Only 2 messages offered any support. From Michael: "Are you okay? I think you did the right thing." From Sarah: "Proud of you for standing up for yourself. Let me know if you need anything." I decided not to respond to any of them that night. Instead, I ran a hot bath, something I rarely had time to do, and allowed myself to simply exist without the constant, crushing pressure of family obligations. The next morning, I called Dr. Winters and scheduled an emergency therapy session for that afternoon. When I arrived at her office, the familiar, calm environment helped settle my frayed nerves. "You stood up to your family," she said, a statement, not a question, after I recounted the previous night's events. "I did," I confirmed, a small, fragile smile touching my lips. "And I feel both terrible and incredibly relieved." "Both reactions are completely normal," she assured me. "You have disrupted a long-established dynamic, and that is bound to feel uncomfortable, even when it is the right thing to do." We spent the session exploring my feelings of guilt and examining the deeply ingrained beliefs that had kept me trapped in this cycle of financial exploitation. Dr. Winters helped me see that my parents had conditioned me to feel responsible for their well-being, effectively reversing the natural parent-child relationship. "What you did took immense courage, Natalie," she told me. "Now comes the harder part: maintaining your boundaries, despite the pressure they will inevitably apply." Her words proved prophetic. By Monday morning, my parents had escalated their attempts to regain control. My father showed up at my workplace unannounced, creating such a scene in the lobby that security had to escort him out. My mother left tearful voicemails, wailing about how they would lose their house without my help. Amanda sent a detailed breakdown of wedding expenses, with payment deadlines highlighted as if our restaurant confrontation had never even happened. The most shocking escalation came on Wednesday when my parents contacted my emergency contact at work, my colleague and friend Julia, claiming there was a family emergency, and they needed to reach me immediately. When Julia called me into her office to relay the message, I broke down and told her everything. "That is financial abuse," she said bluntly, her eyes firm but kind. "And emotional abuse too, Natalie. No wonder you've been so stressed. You've been carrying an entire family on your back." Having someone outside the situation, someone I respected, validate my experience was incredibly powerful. Julia shared that her own mother had been financially controlling, though in a different way, and she had also had to establish firm boundaries. "The guilt never completely goes away," she admitted, "but it gets easier to recognize it as a programmed response that you don't have to act on." Armed with support from my therapist and now Julia, I felt stronger. I finally decided to assess the financial damage of years of supporting my family. I met with a financial advisor, Blake Richardson, who helped me create a comprehensive picture of my situation. The numbers were staggering. Over the past 4 years, I had given my parents more than $200,000. This included their mortgage payments, car loans, credit card bills, and loans that were never repaid. Additionally, I had spent approximately $50,000 on family dinners, holidays, and gifts. If I had invested that money instead, Blake calculated, I would have had enough for a substantial down payment on a house in any neighborhood I desired, plus a healthy retirement fund. The good news, Blake said, his voice reassuring, is that you are still young and your income is excellent. Now that you are not supporting multiple households, you can quickly rebuild your savings. We created a new financial plan focused solely on my goals, rather than my family's endless demands. For the first time, I allowed myself to envision a future based on my own dreams. A comfortable home of my own, travel experiences I had always postponed, and eventually true financial independence. 2 weeks after the restaurant confrontation, I received an unexpected piece of mail. It was a bank statement for a credit card I didn't recognize, showing a balance of $22,000. Upon closer inspection, I realized with horror that it was a credit card in my name, but I had never applied for it or used it. I immediately called the credit card company and discovered that the card had been opened 3 years ago, using my social security number and personal information. The address on the account? My parents' house. The customer service representative informed me that regular payments had been made until recently, when 2 payments had been missed. The revelation that my parents had committed identity theft left me reeling. I pulled my credit report and found 2 additional credit cards and a personal loan, all in my name, but clearly used by my parents. The total fraudulent debt exceeded $45,000. With shaking hands, I called my lawyer, David Mercer, who specialized in both family and financial law. He confirmed what I suspected. My parents' actions constituted identity theft and fraud, serious crimes that could result in criminal charges. You have 2 options, David explained. You can file a police report, which would likely lead to criminal charges against your parents, or you can handle it civilly by disputing the fraudulent accounts with documentation that you did not authorize them. The decision weighed heavily on me. Despite everything, the thought of my parents facing criminal charges was difficult to bear. After careful, agonizing consideration, I chose to dispute the accounts without filing police charges, on the strict condition that my parents sign a legally binding agreement to repay the legitimate debts they had incurred. Armed with this damning evidence and David's legal counsel, I arranged to meet my parents at a neutral location, a conference room at David's office. When they arrived, their self-righteous anger immediately shifted to visible discomfort upon seeing my lawyer present. "What is this about?" my father demanded, his bluster already deflating. "Why did you bring a lawyer?" Without preamble, I placed the credit reports and account statements on the table between us. "This is about identity theft and fraud," I said calmly, my voice flat. "These accounts were opened in my name, without my knowledge or consent." The color drained from my mother's face. My father attempted his usual blustering denial, but the evidence was irrefutable, undeniable. "You have 2 choices," I informed them, following David's guidance. "Either sign this agreement to repay the $45,000 in fraudulent debt, or I file a police report for identity theft." "You'd send your own parents to jail," my mother gasped, truly horrified. "You were given a chance to make this right without criminal charges," I responded, my heart aching but my resolve firm. After hours of negotiation, during which my parents cycled through denial, anger, and eventually desperate bargaining, they finally signed the repayment agreement. The terms were strict. Monthly payments directly to the creditors, with their house as collateral. If they missed even 1 payment, I would proceed with criminal charges. As they left the office defeated and sullen, I felt no joy in my victory, only sadness for what our relationship had become and a cold, hard anger at their betrayal. Yet, beneath those feelings was a growing, powerful sense of empowerment. I was finally taking control of my life, protecting myself from those who had exploited me for years. That evening, I received an unexpected text from my sister Amanda. "Can we talk privately?" "No, Mom and Dad." Cautiously, I agreed to meet her for coffee the next day. When we met, I was surprised to find a very different Amanda than the entitled bride-to-be from the dinner. She looked tired and subdued. "I had no idea," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "about the credit cards, the loans, everything they were doing to you. Would it have mattered?" I asked honestly, the question raw. She looked down at her coffee. "I don't know. Maybe not before, but it does now." She paused, took a shaky breath. "They've been telling everyone that you abandoned the family, that you're selfish and cruel. But Michael told me what really happened. And then I found some of the paperwork for those credit cards while looking for something in Dad's office." For the first time, my sister was seeing our parents clearly, without the filter of favoritism that had protected her all these years. It was a painful awakening. "I'm postponing the wedding," she continued. "Jackson and I are going to save up ourselves, do something smaller. It's not right to expect you to pay for everything, especially after what they did." Her words were the first genuine acknowledgement from any family member of how unfairly I had been treated. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was a start. My brother Michael called later that week, expressing similar realizations. "I always knew they favored Amanda and treated you differently," he admitted, his voice full of regret. "But I had no idea about the financial stuff. Sarah has been telling me for years that something wasn't right about how they expected you to support them, but I didn't want to see it." These conversations with my siblings were bittersweet. On one hand, it was validating to have them finally recognize the abuse I had endured. On the other hand, it highlighted how long they had been willing to benefit from my exploitation without questioning it. As the weeks passed, the full extent of the fallout from my decision became painfully apparent. My parents, desperate to maintain their lifestyle without my financial support, began spreading increasingly malicious lies about me to extended family and their social circle. According to them, I had suffered some kind of mental breakdown, had fallen under the influence of bad people at work, or was selfishly hoarding money while they faced destitution. Most painfully, they told my grandmother, who lived in another state and with whom I had always been close, that I had cut them off without reason and refused to speak to them, despite their loving attempts to reconcile. When my grandmother called me, concerned and confused, I had to gently explain the reality of the situation, including the identity theft. Her shock and subsequent anger toward my parents was yet another painful ripple effect of their actions. "I always thought Robert was too controlling with money," she told me, her voice trembling. "But I never imagined he would steal from his own daughter. Your grandfather would be appalled." The family divide deepened when relatives began taking sides. My father's brothers rallied around him, leaving unpleasant messages about family loyalty and duty. My mother's younger sister, however, who had always been more independent than my mother, reached out to offer support. "Your mother has always been jealous of anyone who can stand on their own 2 feet, she confided. "She resented me for starting my own business instead of relying on a husband or children. I'm not surprised she resents your success too." This insight into my mother's psychology was illuminating, but it did little to ease the pain of her betrayal. I had always believed that beneath her criticism was love and pride in my accomplishments. Now I had to face the possibility that her feelings toward me were far more complicated, and perhaps darker, than I had allowed myself to see. The financial revelations continued as I worked with my lawyer and financial advisor to untangle the sprawling web of exploitation. Beyond the fraudulent accounts in my name, I discovered that my parents had been using my financial information in other ways. They had listed me as a guarantor on their home equity line of credit without my knowledge. They had used my address for tax purposes to claim certain deductions. They had even attempted to access my retirement accounts by claiming to be me over the phone, though thankfully the financial institution's security measures had prevented this. Each discovery felt like a fresh betrayal, reopening wounds I was trying desperately to heal. Dr. Winters helped me process these revelations, not as new injuries, but as confirmation that I had made the right decision to protect myself. "They are showing you exactly who they are, Natalie," she said during one particularly difficult session, after I learned about the home equity line. "Believe them." My meeting with the financial advisor, Blake, took on new urgency as we worked to secure my financial information and prevent further fraud. We froze my credit, changed all my accounts and passwords, and set up monitoring services to alert me to any suspicious activity. Unfortunately, this kind of financial abuse within families is more common than people realize, Blake told me, his expression grim. The betrayal of trust makes it particularly devastating. We calculated that in addition to the more than $200,000 I had knowingly given my parents, they had fraudulently obtained or committed me to approximately $70,000 in additional obligations. The total impact on my financial health approached $300,000, not counting the lost opportunity cost of investments I could have made. Despite this staggering sum, Blake assured me that my situation was far from hopeless. "You have an excellent income, and now that you are not supporting multiple households, you can rebuild quickly. Within 2 years, you could be in a better financial position than most people your age." This perspective helped me focus on the future rather than dwelling on what had been taken from me. I committed to a strict financial recovery plan, cutting unnecessary expenses and maximizing my retirement contributions. For the first time, I was saving and investing for myself, not to create a safety net for others. 3 months after the confrontation at the restaurant, I received an email from my father. The subject line read, "Reconciliation," but the content revealed a very different purpose. After a brief and obviously insincere apology if I felt hurt by anything they might have done, the email got to its real point. They were facing foreclosure on their house and needed my help one last time. The old me would have immediately responded with an offer of assistance, sacrificing my own financial health to rescue them yet again. The new me, strengthened by therapy and supported by genuine friends, recognized the manipulation for what it was. I forwarded the email to David, my lawyer, who confirmed that under our agreement, my parents were required to sell their house to pay off the fraudulent debts before facing foreclosure. They are trying to circumvent the legal agreement, David explained. If they contact you again about financial matters, direct them to me. I sent a brief, factual response referring them to the signed agreement and David's contact information. Within hours my mother called, crying hysterically about becoming homeless. When I calmly reiterated that they needed to speak with my lawyer, her tears dried up instantly, replaced by cold fury. You always were a selfish child, she hissed. After everything we did for you, this is how you repay us? By seeking lawyers on your own parents. I am enforcing an agreement you signed after committing fraud in my name, I replied, surprised by my own steadiness. That is not selfish. It is self-preservation. We are your parents, she shouted, as if this relationship entitled them to commit crimes against me without consequences. Yes, you are, I acknowledged. And that makes your betrayal even worse. I ended the call and immediately contacted Dr. Winters, who helped me work through the renewed guilt and doubt my mother's call had triggered. They are using the parent card as a weapon, she observed. But being parents gave them responsibilities toward you, not unlimited rights to exploit you. Meanwhile, my brother Michael revealed that our parents had been pressuring him to talk sense into me and convince me to help them keep their house. They had also approached my sister Amanda with the same request, suggesting that if she could persuade me to rescue them financially, they would help with her wedding after all. They are trying to use us against each other, Michael said disgustedly. They haven't changed at all. The most surprising development came when Jackson, Amanda's fiancé, contacted me directly. We had never been particularly close, but he wanted to meet for coffee to discuss something important. When we met, he seemed nervous but determined. I need to tell you something about your parents, he began. Last year, before Amanda and I were engaged, your father approached me with a proposition. He suggested that if I married Amanda, the family would benefit financially because you would pay for everything. I stared at him, stunned by this revelation. What? Jackson nodded uncomfortably. He implied that marrying into your family was a good move, because you were the cash cow, who would ensure everyone was taken care of. I was horrified, but Amanda assured me it wasn't like that you were just generous with family. The calculated nature of my father's thinking, the way he had viewed me, not as a daughter, but as a resource to be exploited and even used as a bargaining chip in others' relationships, left me speechless. I wanted you to know, Jackson continued, because Amanda and I are trying to build an honest relationship, and keeping this secret felt wrong. Plus, after what they did with those credit cards, he shook his head. You deserve to know the truth. This conversation with Jackson was the final piece of evidence. I needed to fully accept that my relationship with my parents had never been what I pretended it was. They had not seen me as a daughter to love and support, but as a useful tool to exploit for their own benefit. That night I wrote a letter that I never intended to send, pouring out years of hurt, disappointment and anger. The act of putting these feelings into words was cathartic, allowing me to acknowledge the depth of my pain without directing it at anyone. When I finished, I felt lighter, as if I had finally put down a burden I had been carrying for decades. 6 months after the confrontation at the restaurant, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. Free from the financial burden of supporting my parents and the emotional burden of seeking their approval, I discovered spaces within myself for new growth and connections. My therapy sessions with Dr. Winters shifted from crisis management to deeper healing work. We explored the childhood patterns that had shaped my people-pleasing tendencies, and worked on developing a stronger sense of self-worth that wasn't tied to external validation or productivity. You are inherently valuable, Natalie, Dr. Winters would remind me, her voice a balm. Not because of what you provide to others, but simply because you exist. This concept was revolutionary to someone who had been raised to believe my worth was measured by my usefulness to others. Gradually, I began to internalize this new perspective, making decisions based on my own needs and desires rather than anticipating what others expected of me. One of the most significant changes was the development of a genuine support system outside my family. Julia, my colleague who had supported me during the initial crisis, became a close friend. We began meeting weekly for coffee, sharing our experiences with difficult family dynamics, and celebrating our small victories in establishing healthier patterns. I also joined a support group for adult children of emotionally abusive parents, where I found community with others who truly understood my experiences. The validation and shared wisdom of this group accelerated my healing in ways individual therapy alone could not have accomplished. The hardest part for me was accepting that I could not change them, shared one group member whose story resonated deeply with mine. Once I stopped trying to earn their love and focused on loving myself, everything shifted. As my inner circle transformed, so did my living situation. With my new financial freedom, I decided to sell my condominium and purchase a small house in a neighborhood I loved. The process of creating a home that reflected my taste and priorities became a physical manifestation of my emotional journey. I painted the walls colors I had always admired, but my mother would have criticized as too bold. I arranged furniture for comfort and function rather than appearance. I planted a garden in the small backyard, finding unexpected peace in nurturing growing things. My parents, meanwhile, were forced to downsize significantly after selling their house to comply with our legal agreement. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment, and for the first time in decades, my father began actively looking for employment. According to Michael, who maintained limited contact with them, the transition was difficult and frequently blamed on me. Dad complains constantly about having to work at his age, Michael reported after a brief visit to their new apartment. Mom keeps saying they wouldn't be in this situation if their daughter hadn't abandoned them. Though these reports still stung, the pain was duller now, more a sad acknowledgement of what could never be than an acute wound. I maintained my boundaries, firmly redirecting any direct contact about financial matters to my lawyer and limiting other communication to brief, factual exchanges when necessary. As the months passed, my parents made several attempts at reconciliation, though their definition of making amends never included genuine accountability for their actions or behaviors. Each attempt followed a predictable pattern: initial warmth and vague apologies, followed by subtle hints about their financial difficulties, culminating in direct requests for assistance when the earlier approaches failed. Dr. Winters helped me recognize these patterns and respond appropriately, acknowledging any genuine effort at connection, while firmly maintaining my boundaries around financial support. They need to experience the natural consequences of their actions, she reminded me. That is how real change happens, if it is going to happen at all. The approaching holiday season presented a new challenge. Thanksgiving had always been spent at my parents' house, with me providing the food and often the cooking, while enduring criticism about everything from the moistness of the turkey to my personal life choices. This year would be different. After careful consideration, I declined my parents' invitation, which had come with guilt-inducing references to possibly our last Thanksgiving in this apartment if things don't improve. Instead, I accepted Julia's invitation to join her family celebration. The contrast was illuminating. Julia's family welcomed me warmly, engaged me in genuine conversation, expressed interest in my life without judgment, and thanked me sincerely for the pie I had contributed. There were no backhanded compliments, no thinly veiled criticisms, no tension simmering beneath forced politeness. Is it always like this? I asked Julia quietly as we helped clean up after dinner. Like what? She asked, genuinely confused. So pleasant. So free of drama and guilt. Julia laughed, then grew serious when she realized I wasn't joking. Not every family gathering is perfect, but yes, generally it is like this. This is what family is supposed to feel like, Natalie. Her words stayed with me long after the holiday. This is what family is supposed to feel like. Not an obligation or a source of stress, but a genuine source of support and belonging. As Christmas approached, I made another significant decision. Rather than participating in the usual family gift exchange, which had always involved me giving expensive presents and receiving token items in return, I decided to redirect my holiday budget. I made donations to organizations supporting victims of financial abuse and children from disadvantaged backgrounds, causes that had become personally meaningful to me. I also created new traditions for myself. Attending a holiday concert with Julia and her husband, volunteering at a community dinner, and hosting a small gathering for friends on Christmas Eve. My brother Michael and his wife Sarah joined us, bringing a homemade dish and simple, thoughtful gifts. Amanda and Jackson stopped by briefly, still navigating their own complicated feelings about our family dynamics. They had postponed their wedding indefinitely, choosing instead to save for a house and build their relationship on a more solid foundation before making that commitment. Your standing up to Mom and Dad made me realize I was rushing into marriage partly because it was what they expected, Amanda confided as we shared a quiet moment in the kitchen. I'm trying to figure out what I actually want, not what will please them or solve their problems. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had, an unexpected gift, more valuable than any wrapped present. The new year brought another surprising development. I received a job offer from a competing tech company with a significant salary increase and more leadership responsibility. In the past, I would have declined immediately, worried about how a job change would affect my ability to support my family. Now, I was free to consider the opportunity based solely on my own career goals and interests. After careful consideration and consultation with mentors I trusted, I accepted the position. The transition reinvigorated my professional life, challenging me in new ways and connecting me with colleagues who valued my contributions. Within months, I was leading a major project that showcased my technical and leadership skills, earning recognition I would once have dismissed as undeserved. My financial situation improved rapidly as well. Without the drain of supporting multiple households, my savings grew quickly. Blake, my financial advisor, helped me develop a comprehensive plan that included retirement savings, investments, and funds for personal goals like travel and continued education. You are on track to achieve financial independence well ahead of schedule, he noted at our 6-month review meeting. The difference in your trajectory is remarkable. The most profound changes, however, were internal. I began to recognize and challenge the critical inner voice that had always echoed my parents' judgments. I practiced self-compassion when I made mistakes instead of berating myself. I learned to identify my own preferences and desires rather than automatically deferring to others. These shifts manifested in surprising ways. I discovered I actually enjoyed public speaking, something I had avoided because my father had once mocked a presentation I gave in high school. I found I preferred bold colors and patterns in my clothing despite my mother's lifelong insistence that I should wear slimming neutrals. I realized I loved cooking elaborate meals when it was by choice rather than obligation. Small discoveries, perhaps, but they represented a fundamental reclamation of self that had been suppressed for decades under the weight of others' expectations and judgments. 1 year after the confrontation at the restaurant, I could look back and see not just what I had lost, but what I had gained. The journey had been painful, the costs real. Family relationships had been irreparably altered. Illusions of parental love shattered. Financial resources lost. Yet from those losses had emerged a stronger, more authentic self, capable of creating boundaries, recognizing genuine connection, and building a life aligned with my own values rather than others' demands. Exactly 1 year after the dinner that changed everything, I sat in my garden, reflecting on the journey. The spring flowers were blooming, a visual reminder of growth and renewal after a difficult winter. My new home, a modest but charming 2-bedroom house with a yard, represented more than just a physical space. It was a sanctuary I had created for myself, free from the influence and expectations of others. My relationship with my parents had settled into a carefully structured pattern. After months of attempted manipulation and several cycles of arguments and superficial reconciliations, we had established what my therapist called structured contact. We communicated primarily through email, with occasional brief phone calls for specific purposes. Our interactions were civil but distant, focused on practical matters rather than emotional connection. My father had found part-time work as a consultant, though he frequently complained about the indignity of having to work at his age. My mother had taken a position at a local boutique, her first job in decades. They continued to live in their apartment, having finally accepted that their previous lifestyle, funded by my income, was no longer available to them. The legal agreement regarding the fraudulent accounts had been fulfilled, with the sale of their house covering most of the debts. I had absorbed some losses, but Blake assured me that my financial recovery was well ahead of schedule. My new job had come with equity options that were already showing promising returns, and my savings had grown substantially without the drain of supporting multiple households. More important than the financial resolution was the emotional freedom I had gained. Dr. Winters and I had worked through layers of conditioned guilt and obligation, developing new patterns of thought that allowed me to prioritize my own well-being without the crushing weight of shame that had once accompanied any act of self-care. The most significant change I see in you, Natalie, Dr. Winters observed during a recent session, is your ability to distinguish between genuine responsibility and imposed obligation. You can now recognize when someone is attempting to manipulate you through guilt or family loyalty. This new discernment had allowed me to maintain healthier relationships with my siblings, who had undergone their own reckonings with our family dynamics. Michael and Sarah had become regular parts of my life, joining me for dinner every few weeks and sharing honest conversations about our upbringing and its effects. Amanda and I had developed a more tentative but increasingly authentic connection. After postponing her wedding, she had entered therapy herself, beginning to recognize how our parents' favoritism had shaped her sense of entitlement and dependency. Our conversations were sometimes uncomfortable, but always real, a stark contrast to the superficial interactions of the past. I never realized how much they pitted us against each other, she told me during a recent lunch. They made me believe you had it easy because you were smart and successful, while I needed their help and protection. Looking back, I can see they were using both of us in different ways. This insight from my sister, who had once been my parents' most effective tool for manipulation, represented a profound shift in our family system. The old dynamics were being questioned, the unspoken rules challenged, the established roles rejected. My social circle had expanded and deepened in ways I never could have anticipated. Julia and her husband had become close friends, including me in family gatherings and weekend activities. My support group for adult children of emotionally abusive parents had provided both healing and lasting friendships with people who truly understood my experiences. I had even begun dating again, cautiously at first, fearful of repeating patterns of giving too much and expecting too little. Thomas, a software architect I met through a professional conference, was patient with my careful boundaries and respectful of my journey. Our relationship was developing slowly, built on mutual respect and genuine interest, rather than need or obligation. Perhaps the most significant change was my relationship with myself. The critical inner voice that had echoed my parents' judgments for decades had gradually quieted, replaced by a more compassionate and realistic assessment of my strengths and weaknesses. I had learned to celebrate my accomplishments without dismissing them, and to acknowledge my mistakes without defining myself by them. This self-acceptance extended to my appearance, my preferences, my choices, and my needs. I no longer felt compelled to justify my existence through constant productivity or service to others. I could rest without guilt, pursue pleasure without shame, and express anger without fear. The healing was not complete, and perhaps never would be. There were still moments of doubt, flashes of the old patterns, occasional dreams in which I was once again the desperate child seeking approval that never came. But these moments no longer defined me or determined my choices. They were echoes of the past, not dictates for the present or future. As I sat in my garden on that anniversary, I reflected on the lessons of this difficult journey. True family is defined by mutual respect and support, not by blood or obligation. The people who had stood by me, validated my experiences, and respected my boundaries had proven to be more family to me than those who shared my DNA but exploited my loyalty. Setting boundaries is not selfish. It is essential for healthy relationships. By establishing and maintaining clear limits on what I would accept and provide, I had created space for more authentic connections based on mutual care rather than exploitation. Financial independence is a form of self-protection. By securing my own resources and ensuring they were used according to my values and priorities, I had gained freedom from manipulation and control. Healing requires both separation and connection. Distancing myself from toxic relationships had been necessary, but equally important was building new, healthier relationships that demonstrated what genuine care and respect looked like. Self-worth is inherent, not earned through service or sacrifice. This was perhaps the most difficult lesson, requiring daily practice and reinforcement to counter decades of contrary messaging. Yet it was also the most transformative, reshaping how I moved through the world and related to others. These lessons had come at a high cost. The illusion of unconditional parental love had been shattered. Family relationships were permanently altered. Years of financial resources were lost. Yet what I had gained was far more valuable. Authentic self-knowledge, genuine connections, and the freedom to create a life aligned with my own values rather than others' expectations. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my garden, I felt a deep sense of peace. The journey was not over, but the hardest part was behind me. The path forward, while not always clear or easy, was mine to choose, guided by my own wisdom and surrounded by people who truly wished me well. If you have ever struggled with setting boundaries with family, thank you for listening to my story. Take care.